Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah Birch and thank you so much for coming back. If you are a previous viewer, make sure you subscribe, and if you are a new viewer, then hello, welcome. I do a lot of things on this channel, but lately I've been really enjoying making true crime content. And that's what I'm going to continue to do today. This case is a very long one, so I'm going to just jump right into it and not waste any more time, so buckle up. I do want to give a quick trigger warning just because this story in particular is pretty heavy and pretty dark at certain points. There is a murder of a young boy, and there also is a lot of grooming that goes on between a young girl and an older man. So if any of those two things are just too much for you today, I do understand, and I hope you will come back at some point in the future for another video, or maybe you can go back and check out the catalog of other videos that I've done and see if there's something there that you might find more appropriate for you today. So with all of that being said, let's get into the case. This is the story of Jasmine Richardson, the youngest person in Canadian history to ever be convicted of a multiple murder. So this case takes place in Medicine Hat, Alberta. I know it's kind of a funny name, but it is a beautiful place to live. It's actually considered to be one of the best places to live in Alberta. It has a population of just over 63,000 people, and although the temperatures, like a lot of places in Canada, get very cold in the winter, it still is a pretty normal, friendly, safe place to live for the most part. And one of the families that was living here in Medicine Hat was the Richardson family. The Richardson family included Mark, the father, who was 42 years old, Deborah, the mother, who was 48 years old, Jasmine, the sister, who was 12 years old, and Jacob, the younger brother, who was 8 years old. By all accounts, the Richardson family was just your average, normal, middle-class family. Everyone seemed to like them. Their neighbors had nothing bad to say about them. They had friends at school, friends in the community. And although there was 4 years between Jasmine and Jacob, they were actually at the same elementary school and they got along quite well. Everyone said Jacob really looked up to his sister and admired her, and Jasmine really took pride in being a big sister and looking after Jacob, as she should. Little Jacob was described as just a sweet, happy, energetic boy who, couldn't sit still for too long and always wanted to go play, which is pretty normal for your average 8-year-old boy. And luckily for him, his best friend in the world was actually his next door neighbor. I've heard in reports that his name was Gareth, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But he lived right next door to the Richardsons on the same street, so after school, the two would always meet up and knock on each other's doors and go play outside. Jasmine was a little bit older, but was also thriving in life. She was doing well at school, had good grades. She was considered, well-liked and had lots of friends at school. She was also on the swimming team, and she also had an interest in fine arts, so apparently she joined her school's fine arts program. After everything I've told you, honestly, these two kids seem like a parent's dream, they got along with each other, they were both thriving at school, they had friends, and I'm sure Mark and Deborah were very proud of the children they had raised. Mark was a successful technician, and Deborah was actually a stay-at-home mom. We all know is the hardest job of all. But when the kids were a little bit older, she took an interest in Reiki healing and actually decided that she wanted to pursue that as a career on the side. Part of her interest and burgeoning passion for Reiki healing was actually her experience in the past with overcoming drug and alcohol addiction. And this is one thing Mark could sympathize with Deborah on because he also was a recovering addict for both drugs and alcohol. And it is said, I couldn't find this confirmed anywhere, but I heard in multiple reports that the two of them met in some sort of rehabilitation program or like an AA program. So the two had really been each other's support system for a very long time and were actively in recovery together and building this family together. And it's really a testament of their individual strength and their strength as a couple that they were able to claw out of the throes of addiction and build a beautiful family and a beautiful home for themselves. So we have, two parents who are in love, pursuing their careers, two kids who are thriving and partaking in school activities, and it seems by all accounts that everything is going well and life is good, until it wasn't. While it's common for preteens to experience changes around the age of 11 or 12, they start going through puberty maybe, they start hanging out with new friends, they want to listen to different music, they want to cut their hair. Things like that are completely normal and not necessarily anything to be concerned over, but the changes that were happening within Jasmine Richardson were on a different level. And as she would continue to undergo these drastic changes to her personality, it would obviously have a subsequent effect on the family and the family dynamics. And I'm going to talk about those shifts for the next little while. So you can really understand the lead up to the crime here. Before she entered into what I guess I will call the next phase of her life, as you could probably tell from my description and some of the photos, Jasmine was just a pretty innocent, active, eager young girl. None of her teachers, friends, anyone had any complaints about her behavior or her personality. She just was happy to go along and get along. But when she reached the end of her 11th year going into her 12th year, people really started to notice some changes in Jasmine, specifically with her outward appearance. She actually started hanging around with a new group of kids who would hang out at the local mall. And these kids are what you would describe as goth or emo. Some people use the word alternative, but I don't know if that's like the right word to use. But, kids that were a little different than, and you know what, I shouldn't say kids, because this particular group were actually older teenagers. They were 16 and 17 years old, and Jasmine was just turning 12, and she began hanging out with these older kids. She really liked them. She really liked their vibe. She liked their aesthetic. She liked the way that they were so raw and open and honest about kind of some of the hardships in life and some of the things they'd been through. I imagine for her as a 12-year-old feeling like maybe she was always kept in this little bubble. Maybe she found it intriguing to learn about life from these older people who a lot of them had a lot rougher upbringings than Jasmine had. And as she continued to hang out with what I will call the mall kids or the mall group, but just so you know, these people are older and they are identify as goth or emo, just so you understand. But I will just be referring to them as like the mall group throughout the video. As she continued to hang out with them, she was inspired. So she started wearing more black, wearing dark eyeliner around her eyes, painting her nails black, straightening her hair so it was like pin straight, going along the side of her face and kind of covering up her eyes. In photos that she would take of herself, she would be kind of doing these strange poses, trying to look maybe more mysterious or more dangerous instead of just smiling normally like she was before. And apparently her clothes were also becoming more revealing, which her parents definitely did not like. It would be one thing for her parents to not be too concerned if she was just playing around with fashion and makeup. As I said, that's not that uncommon for a 12-year-old girl. I never personally went through like an emo goth phase, not yet anyway. But I went through lots of phases. I was like, this week I want to be a cowgirl. This week I want to be a pop star. This week I want to be a mermaid. And, you see what's popular out there with magazines, TV shows, celebrities, your friends, and you want to emulate it. It's completely normal. But I think when parents start getting concerned, and when Jasmine's parents start getting concerned, was when it was affecting her personality and her relationship with her friends and family. She started losing interest in all the things she was interested in before, her swimming, her fine arts program. She kind of was mentally checking out at school, and apparently she would just like glare at her parents and just not have any emotion really, not have any love towards them. And, she was self-isolating from them. She didn't really talk to them, didn't open up to them. I'm sure they were poking and prodding, trying to get more information out of her. And a lot of times, unfortunately, that has the reverse effect where it makes the child clam up more and resent their parents more. I just want to clarify here, because I do have personal friends who identify as goth or emo. There's nothing wrong or bad about this lifestyle or this way of dressing. I didn't know Mark or Deborah personally, but I just want to clarify, I don't think that's what their issue was with Jasmine's changes, was the fact that she was dressing in black and straightening her hair. And I don't want to demonize or blame the fact that these children were goth or emo on what happens in this case. I just want to make that perfectly clear, because I know there is a lot of stigma and stereotypes that go along with those communities. I think what was really concerning her parents, which I do think is valid, is that her personality was changing, demeanor was changing, her behavior, her grades, all of that. And I think those are things you really have to be so cautious of when you have a young child, is allowing them some freedom to explore, but making sure that they still meet certain standards and you still have a certain amount of expectation for them to live up to. It's their life you're talking about. You can't let your 12-year-old just like drop out of school and drop out of all their programs and stuff. I mean, you can, but that's not really, like, sometimes parenting means you have to police their activity a little bit, and you have to put parameters on them, and you have to ask them more questions and dig in further, and maybe not always respect their privacy. I think there's a very hard balance, especially with this age of like preteens, of trying to give them some freedom and independence, but also still be their parent. And Mark and Deborah did their absolute best throughout all of these changes to try to respect Jasmine's new interests and new aesthetic, but also keeping an eye on her. Throughout this new journey that Jasmine was on, she started to take an interest in like hard metal and rock music. I guess two of her favorite bands were Slipknot and Misfits. And she would often go to these sort of all ages events that would play this type of music at some sort of local venue in Medicine Hat. I don't know really the details of these shows, but from what I'm gathering, it seemed like there was like a monthly like rock night or metal night at some sort of all age. We had stuff like that kind of in elementary school and high school, like local dances, and they were so fun, to be honest. Like I lived for those. And Jasmine's parents wanted to support her as much as they could, even though they were concerned. So they would let her go to these concerts with her older friends. But at one of these concerts, Jasmine would meet a man who would literally change the course of her life forever. Jeremy Allen Steinke was 23 years old and from Medicine Hat, and he also was a part of this goth or emo group of friends. And he would go to these rock concerts as well, even though he was 23 years old and a lot of the other people were preteens and teenagers. But that's the least of our concerns with this case, just you wait. And at one of these concerts, Jeremy saw Jasmine across the way and apparently was just absolutely struck with her beauty and kind of love at first sight. He apparently did not realize she was 12 years old, and I need to be so careful with what I say here, to give him like an ounce of grace here, just an ounce, a teeny weeny little ounce. Jasmine did look old for her age. She did have mature features, and she definitely, in my opinion, looked older than 12, but there's no world where she looks 18 and older, which would be the only appropriate age for a 23-year-old like Jeremy to be interested in her. And Jasmine, had the dark makeup and the straight hair, and so I can see why she would look a little older than 12, but to be honest, it doesn't really matter that much because apparently Jeremy had a history of going for young girls. He's a pedophile, let's just be honest. He was interested in young girls. And also, even if someone, you hear people say that all the time now, like, oh, these girls look so old for their age. Like, I couldn't tell that she was under 18. And I do think overall girls do look older nowadays with, like, their ability to do their hair and makeup and all of that with, like, TikTok and everything. Trust me, like, you have a conversation for 5 minutes with a 15-year-old and you know that's a 15-year-old. You just know. Like, children, teenagers, they can change their outward appearance, but they can't magically talk and think and portray themselves as a grown adult. Like, that just comes with time. So I don't really buy that excuse when people say that. Like, maybe when you first glance at someone, but if you have more than a 2-minute conversation with someone, you should be aware of what their age is, if you have any sort of, like, common sense. Either way, Jeremy, of course, approached her and started talking with her and flirting with her at the concert, and she was interested in flirting back, and the two exchanged contact information, and he said he'd like to see her again at another point, and she agreed. And that happened. The two of them would continue to meet up in the coming weeks and hang out with each other, and then eventually started dating and becoming boyfriend and girlfriend, even though you can't consensually, ethically, lawfully be boyfriend and girlfriend when one girl is 12 and the boy is 23. Like, that's not, like, I feel weird saying boyfriend and girlfriend in relation to this relationship, but that is what they considered themselves to be. And they began having sex. They had an intimate sexual relationship from this point onwards, and that is statutory rape. I just want to make that perfectly clear. Like, this is just so disgusting on so many levels. I don't even have to explain to you guys why this is so disgusting. Jasmine was head over heels. This was her first love, her first experience with, a man, and making all these promises to her and taking her out on dates and having sex with her. I remember my first love and my first true sexual partner, and I was older. I was like 19 or 20 when I had like my first true boyfriend and my first true love. And you feel like you are in a different planet. You cannot think straight. You're feeling all these things you've never felt before. You do naturally kind of isolate yourself from sometimes your friends and family because you put all of your attention into this person because they have just become your world. I can't even imagine all of that crazy emotion and change when you are 12 years old. Like, it was hard enough for me to navigate when I was 19 or 20, that those crazy feelings of first love, let alone when you're 12. Like, I didn't even know how to make a bagel without burning it at 12, like, it's just no age for a girl to be having sex. It's so upsetting. And that's just the beginning. That's just the tip of the iceberg of how upsetting this case is, guys. And you may be wondering, like, what the hell would Jasmine see in this man? I've probably by this point in the video put up a few photos of Jeremy Stanky, whatever the hell his name is. And yeah, he's not a looker. He's not anything special. But Jasmine apparently would say that he was just so different from boys her age. And you hear this a lot with, like, grooming and relationships with young girls and older men, is like, oh, he's more mature and he's an adult and he treats me differently and boys my age just don't understand me. You hear that type of rhetoric a lot with these type of dynamics, and a lot of that is coming from the predator, like from the groomer, saying, like, I bet you boys your age don't understand you, and like, a lot of that is being manipulated through the groomer. And Jeremy was apparently, like, the ringleader of all of his friends, the goth mall group. Apparently they all really looked up to him, they admired him, he was kind of the boss of the group, so to speak. And Jasmine liked that. She liked that he was kind of intimidating and he demanded some authority and he had some control over people. Like, she found that to be attractive qualities. If there were good qualities about him, I can guarantee you those were outweighed by all the horrible qualities and all of the red flags. This man had so many red flags. It's unbelievable. So let's get a little bit more into the backstory of Jeremy Allen Stanky. Guys, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He was born on January 15th, 1983 in Medicine Hat to an alcoholic mother and an extremely abusive father. The father, all throughout Jeremy's childhood, would not only abuse his mother, but he would also abuse Jeremy verbally, physically. And I don't know a ton of details, but from what I've gathered through my research, it was a pretty traumatic, harrowing childhood for Jeremy. Jeremy also was said, apparently none of this has been, like, medically confirmed, but just through people who knew Jeremy and spoke after the fact, apparently he was extremely immature for his age and didn't think the same way other 23-year-olds did. A lot of people would describe him as having the brain of a 15 or 16-year-old. So, in other words, he was a bit delayed intellectually or socially. And some people believe, again, this is not confirmed, that this was because of fetal alcohol syndrome. And another thing that kind of points to that, which again, I need to be careful because none of this is confirmed, but he had a little bit of a specific look about him. Babies who suffered fetal alcohol syndrome often have a certain look in their face, like physical attributes that kind of point to that. And some people think that Jeremy has those same attributes. So people are just making assumptions based on his looks and his personality and the fact that he was apparently emotionally delayed and intellectually delayed. But I have no proof that his mother was drinking while she was pregnant with him. However, it would not surprise me because she was an alcoholic for the large majority of her life. There's no understanding pedophilia, but I think maybe if he really viewed the world as a 15-year-old, it would make sense why he would emotionally connect with a girl around that age. And then just in terms of, like, a manipulation level, if he is not sophisticated enough intellectually to hang out with 18, 19, 20-year-old girls because they're going to see right through him, of course he's going to go for a younger girl that he can still have, like, the level up on. He can still have the one up on this girl. And I guess what I'm saying is that, let's say he were to go for an 18-year-old, which would be the only legal age he could date or have sex with, she would probably realize within a few days that Jeremy is a piece of shit. Like, he was unemployed, still living with his mom, which no tea, no shade to people living at home. I'm still living at home because the economy is crazy right now. And I know a lot of people are unemployed. A lot of people are losing their, like, I'm not trying to throw shade on that. I've been unemployed at many times in my life. But he had no interest in getting employed. He had no interest in working, period. He just truly did not see the appeal in working and was happy to just ride his mom's coattails, living in the trailer park for the rest of his life. He was a high school dropout, never finished school. Jeremy also drank a lot and would partake in recreational drug usage all the time. Obviously, Jeremy was very mentally ill and mentally unstable, and I can understand why, if you really look at the conditions of his upbringing. You know, it's no secret, and I do talk about this a lot in my true crime videos, that people who victimize others are very, very often victimized themselves, especially in childhood. Again, not saying that that's an excuse ever to inflict harm on other people, but it's just a pattern we see time and time again, that trauma just recycles itself throughout families, throughout friend groups. If you've bullied your whole life by your friends, it's very likely that you'll grow up and bully everyone else around you. It's undeniable that Jeremy had a horrible childhood. He never knew real love, real support, real comfort. His mother was neglecting him because of her addiction to alcohol. His father was beating him and calling him names. Apparently, Jeremy was religiously bullied at school growing up by all of his friends and peers. And apparently, he never really had friends until he dropped out of school and joined this sort of mall group of kids. And that's when he finally felt like he belonged with this type of community, which is, I guess, kind of a similar feeling that Jasmine had when she joined that group as well. So with all this in mind, Jeremy really had no sense of emotional regulation or proper boundaries by the time he turned 12 or 13. And his mom would go on to admit later on, when all of this happened, that she was a horrible mother. Those words came out of her mouth. So that says a lot. And by age 13, apparently he was having a very hard time regulating his emotions, understanding everything he was feeling, and he had anxiety and depression already by age 13, and ADHD symptoms as well. To cope with all this pain and confusion, Jeremy began using marijuana religiously as a coping mechanism by the age of 13, and he would continue to use that for years and years and years. You don't need me to tell you that that will have a profound effect on your brain chemistry and the way your brain develops when you start using weed so consistently from the age of 13. This is why a lot of people say, doctors, that you should not start smoking weed consistently, especially until you're about 25 years old, because that is when your frontal cortex and your brain is actually properly developed into an adult. I guess after that point, when everything has developed the way it's supposed to, if you want to play around a bit, then it's a little bit safer than to do it when you're so young. Anyway, now that all that's been said, I wanted to just give you guys a little bit of a rundown on Jeremy's background. With every case, I just struggle because I feel bad for childhood version of Jeremy. I feel bad for that boy who's being bullied, the boy who's being neglected. I feel horrible for that child. I want to help that child. I want to get him proper help. I want to get him properly assessed. But then I have no empathy for the older version of Jeremy that goes on to commit a horrendous crime. And true crime is not black and white. It's a nuanced thing. Like everything else in humanity. So I just wanted to give that context about Jeremy's upbringing. I do think it's important to share his full story, just as I'm going to share Jasmine's full story. And then you guys can make your own assumptions and your own thoughts and feelings known at the end. But I do think it's fair to tell everyone's side of the story to a degree and present all of the facts as I know them. I don't know every single fact, but I'm going to share everything I found out. So now is the time where I'm going to tell you a very interesting element of Jeremy's personality that I haven't discussed yet, which is that by the age of 14, Jeremy had convinced himself that he was a 300-year-old werewolf. Yeah, you heard that right. Jeremy believed he was a werewolf, and not just any old werewolf, a 300-year-old werewolf. As part of this identity, he would wear a vial of blood around his neck to apparently show that whenever he needed a taste for blood, which isn't that vampire and not werewolf? I don't know. I need to reread Twilight. I'm confused. But he would wear a vial of blood around his neck, kind of giving, MGK, Megan Fox vibes. Jeremy apparently liked the taste of blood, and he apparently made a batch of blood-soaked cookies. He mixed blood in with cookie dough to make blood cookies and ate those with a friend at one point. Again, no idea if that's true or not, or if that was just a tale he spun to sound cool and kind of get a rise out of his friends. It's hard to know with Jeremy. So now let's sort of put the narratives of Jeremy and Jasmine together. Jasmine's parents started to understand after a certain point, kind of observing their daughter, that this was probably more than just some new friends. They really figured that there was a new person in Jasmine's life who was manipulating her and influencing her to change herself. And they did eventually find out about Jeremy and about the age gap. And of course, they were horrified and disturbed to learn that their daughter had been dating and sleeping with a 23-year-old man. But they didn't blame Jasmine, which I appreciate. They didn't yell at her or anything. They were concerned. They were scared. They saw Jasmine as a victim, which with grooming, she was the victim. And they wanted to help her and protect her as parents should. They didn't scream at her, call her names. They knew that Jasmine was being manipulated and preyed upon. So of course they put strict rules in place for Jasmine and Jeremy to never see each other again, not speak anymore. And Jasmine kind of more or less, for lack of a better phrase, was under the thumb of her parents from this point onwards, which can 100% understand why her parents would do that. They would, pick her up from school, drop her off at school. If she went to these rock concerts, they would go there with her and supervise her. They took away her phone, took away her laptop. She was only allowed to use, like the family computer or whatever. They were really trying their best to keep an eye on her to make sure that she didn't fall back into the hands of Jeremy. However, you know how kids are. They're stubborn and they're smart. And Jasmine figured out a way to continue talking with Jeremy. I'm just reading from here to make sure I get this accurate. So the first website that they signed up for was called vampirefreaks.com, and that was kind of like a forum for like fantasy lovers. And they had an online private chat, so they could chat on there. She could just go and then she could just delete the website when she was done, and her parents wouldn't know because it was all through the website. And then apparently they also were communicating on a website called Nexopia, which was a popular website for Canadian teens at the time, which I have never heard of this website, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I was just watching dance videos on YouTube my entire childhood. Jeremy's username was Soul Eater on this website, and Jasmine's was Runaway Devil, which kind of exemplifies the way that these two saw themselves and each other. They definitely were both kind of cryptic, brooding, misunderstood, and felt as though they needed to portray this to the world, even in their online identities. This website, Nexopia, also had a private chat feature, so Jeremy and Jasmine were able to talk on there as well. These two were steadfast in the idea that they were soulmates. They were star-crossed lovers. They were destined to be together, especially with all of their interest in fantasy worlds and vampires and werewolves. It seems like they were creating this deluded narrative for themselves that it was them against the world, and everyone was trying to stop their love from coming to fruition, but they would do whatever it takes to win in the end. I'm going to make a big statement here, but I stand by it. Any couple, especially when there's like an age gap or like a predatory vibe or an abusive vibe, any couple that says it's us against the world, red flag. Red flag. That term, that phrase sends shivers down my spine. It should never be you and your couple against everyone else, against your friends, against your family, against your community. That, to me, is just isolating yourself inside an echo chamber of you and your partner's thoughts and feelings, where you're going to lose perspective on so many other things and so many other people. It's creating this grandiose narrative for your relationship as if you guys are, so much better than everyone else and you understand things that other people don't understand. And not only is it sort of annoying for outside people, trying to get through to you, but it also is just really dangerous to only hear the thoughts, perspectives, feelings of one particular person and to kind of block out everything else in the world. That type of codependence where it's us against the world, I know that you might think, oh, Sarah, you're reading too much into it. It's just a phrase. It's a phrase that always somehow leads to a really negative outcome and really negative consequences, I swear. Also, just to be perfectly clear, a 23-year-old man and 12-year-old girl, or it doesn't even matter about the genders, it could be vice versa, they can't be soulmates. They're not soulmates. They're not star-crossed lovers. They're nothing of the sort. That is a victim and a predator. That is a pedophilic relationship, and that is all. The only two people that believe these two were soulmates were these two people. So the two continued to communicate online here and there through these different forums, and their frustration was growing and growing at the fact that they couldn't see each other anymore. They couldn't sleep together anymore. It felt as though the world was keeping them apart, but that's not how they saw it. They saw two people in particular keeping them apart, and that was Mark and Deborah. They blame Mark and Deborah for all of this. If those two weren't around, then Jasmine and Jeremy could live their happy lives together without any sort of interruptions. They were willing to do whatever it took to be together, even if it meant killing the three people in Jasmine's life that have always been there for her. With that being said, let's move to April 23rd, 2006. And the little neighbor boy, Gareth, who is best friends with Jacob, goes on over to the front door of the Richardson home to knock on the door and see if Jacob wanted to play. It was a beautiful, sunny spring day, and he saw that the Richardson truck was in the driveway, which normally meant that the family was home. So he's knocking on the door and getting no answer, and then a few seconds later he knocks again and gets no answer. And he seemed like a determined little fella because he just would not give up. He was pretty sure the Richardsons were home. He saw the truck in the driveway. So he knocked one more time, and still there was no answer. So he decided to go do a little investigation and peek through the various windows of the house. He made his way around the back of the house and looked in the basement window, like one of those windows that's quite small, but you can just see into the basement. And tragically, that is where he saw the dead body of Deborah Richardson lying in a pool of blood on the floor. He immediately freaked out, obviously, and ran back to his home to tell his mother about this. And he was screaming and saying, "Mom, I just saw a dead body. I saw a dead body." And his mother was like, "You better be telling the truth. You cannot lie about this. This is not a funny thing to lie about." And he promised that he was telling the truth. So he dragged his mom back to the window, and she took a look for herself. Obviously, once the mother saw the body, she believed her son, and she actually apparently put him in the minivan, her family minivan, and locked the doors just for the time being to keep him safe, because she had no idea where this murderer was, whether they were still roaming around the houses, whether they had broken into her house. I don't know why she locked him in the minivan. That seems like kind of dangerous with I don't know. I don't know the details, but in the moment, that was her motherly instinct, was to keep him somewhere contained and safe where she knew where he was. So that's what she did. And then she went back to the Richardson family home and immediately called 911. And police came rushing through as fast as possible, and they arrived on scene at 1 p.m. Police broke down the doors of the Richardson family home and immediately obviously went downstairs with their guns drawn, and that is actually where they saw two dead bodies on the floor. The one that was there before, Deborah Richardson, which was more in the center of the floor, and then over kind of by the staircase, more so in the corner, was the dead body of Mark Richardson. Another set of police officers went to clear the rest of the house, and tragically they discovered the dead body of 8-year-old Jacob Richardson upstairs in his bed in his own bedroom. All three victims had been killed with a knife, so Mark and Deborah downstairs had sort of experienced a frenzy stabbing, so multiple stabbings, really quick, go, trying to kill them as quickly as possible, and a lot of violence, a lot of anger, whereas Jacob upstairs had actually been killed in a different way, but I will get to that a little bit later on. It became pretty clear to these investigators that whoever had done this probably were not thieves and just wanted to quickly disarm the Richardsons so they could flee the home. This attack seemed personal, aggressive, and overkill. And then one of the police who was inside the home actually took a look at a family portrait up on the wall and noticed that there was another family member who was nowhere to be found. So immediately everyone turned their sights to Jasmine Richardson, and they were really scared for this young girl, thinking that she had been abducted and taken from the scene, because maybe this whole crime was actually about Jasmine. Maybe she was the initial target and the abductor was willing to go through everyone else to get to her. To me, that seems like a fair assumption, because she was a 12-year-old girl. And so that's what their sort of leading theory was. So they immediately put out an Amber Alert for 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson that had like her age, her hair color, a photo of her. And then she also was broadcasted her photo and her information for people to give tips on all of the local news channels as well. Police, of course, went door to door to neighbors' homes to ask if they had any information, and not one neighbor said that they saw or heard anything on the night of the murders. They also said that the Richardson family were lovely people with no drama, no issues, and they could not believe that this had happened on their own street. Back at the scene of the crime, forensic investigators were hard at work trying to piece together what happened here, since none of the victims were alive, unfortunately, to tell the stories themselves. However, they were able to paint quite a vivid picture of the series of events just based on the blood spatter alone. Think like Dexter Morgan here. They were examining blood spatter, blood pooling, how much blood was where, and they were able to understand through this science that Deborah was actually killed first, Mark was killed second, and it looked as though he had defensive wounds, so it looked like he was trying to run away up the stairs, was stabbed on the back a few times, then fell back down the stairs and was stabbed on the stomach. And then upstairs, when investigators first went into Jacob's room, they saw that he had his throat, trigger warning, he's just a little baby, it's so sad, but they saw that Jacob had his throat slit. And they thought, okay, that's the way he died, because there was a spatter of blood up against the back, like the headrest of the bed. But however, when they continued to examine the body and they pulled down the comforters, because the comforters were pulled up all the way to his neck, they saw that he actually had a large stab wound right in the chest, which actually would have contributed to killing him as well. And it looked either like someone was trying to hide that particular stab wound with the duvet being pulled up, but what they actually thought, based on the psychology of this, was that whoever had done this to him felt some guilt and remorse, or just some basic primal care for this child, so they kind of tucked him in and kept him safe and warm in his bed until he could be discovered. And you know, I heard this a lot, like watching Criminal Minds and stuff growing up, that is often a sign that the murderer knows the victim or cares about the victim or has some remorse, if they like stage them in sort of a comforting way, or like wrap a blanket around them, or like things like that. It's make a difference. If you kill someone, you kill someone, but it's this weird psychological way of like showing them a bit of respect after you've murdered them. So this was interesting to them. They thought, okay, maybe the person who did this was fond of Jacob in some way, or maybe they didn't mean to kill him. Either way, the priority was still Jasmine Richardson. Where had this 12-year-old girl gone? They needed to try to get her home alive, because if they lost all 4 victims of this family, the tragedy would be even greater. So police, as they're in the home, another thing that they do is they go into Jasmine's room and they're taking a look around, as police do, trying to understand what her life was like, who she was talking to, and who could have done this. And so they pull up her laptop and they open the correspondence on the online forum, and they immediately are scrolling through messages and messages between Soul Eater and Runaway Devil, aka Jeremy and Jasmine. And it didn't take them long to understand that this was a male and Jasmine who were communicating online and had some sort of romantic, sexual, codependent relationship. They also saw that Jasmine had posted a very cryptic, strange final message on her board on the forum 24 hours before the murder that wrote, "Welcome to my tragic end." Around the same time that they were starting to raise eyebrows a little bit at Jasmine and this unknown man, police tips were flying in from the public, people calling in to say, oh, I saw Jasmine here. I just saw Jasmine drive by in a car here. I just saw Jasmine eating here. And all of these tips were from the local community. In the previous hours, they had seen Jasmine in Medicine Hat. And all of them said she was with an older guy. So now police are really starting to put the pieces together that okay, whoever she was talking to online is probably the man that's with her now, and she's alive. And so the people on the phone would be like, what condition was she in? Did she look afraid? And the tipsters were like, she seemed good. She was laughing. She was smiling. She seemed happy. She did not seem like she was in danger or injured at all. So police obviously had to change their tactics at this point and had to rethink the entire case. They actually put out a BOLO, which is a be on the lookout, to the neighboring provinces in case Jasmine and Jeremy decided to flee, because now they were really starting to suspect that these two had something to do with the murder. So they would have contacted Saskatchewan and they would have contacted British Columbia, which would be on the east and west side of Alberta, to just say, hey, keep an eye out on the roads, keep an eye out for this car, keep an eye out for these people. We're looking for them for an investigation of a triple homicide. One thing I forgot to mention that is kind of important and absolutely graphic and horrible is that apparently someone eating in the restaurant at the same time that Jeremy and Jasmine were, who was one of the people who called in, she apparently overheard Jasmine say to one of her friends, because I guess they were there with like a group of the mall goth kids, apparently she said that so-and-so was gutted like a fish. And the witness didn't know who she was talking about, but that particular line, especially given the context of this triple homicide that they're all hearing about on the news, that particular line stood out to her, and she definitely wanted to report it. So less than 24 hours after the gruesome murder of her 3 family members, Jasmine and Jeremy were officially located in a town called Leader, Saskatchewan, which is in the province over, and this is about 130 kilometers away from Medicine Hat. So they had driven quite far together and made it into a whole separate province, but they were stopped by local police in Saskatchewan and thankfully apprehended. The two were obviously brought into the police department for further questioning and to be charged, and they were kept in separate but like adjacent holding cells, and this was just in the department, so it's not like they're in an official jail or prison yet. So they're right beside each other. Obviously they can't touch each other, but they can hear each other, and they started passing notes back and forth between the cells to communicate. Again, I don't know how this was even allowed. I feel like they need to like pay attention to this stuff. But, I mean, it's not like the two of them could go anywhere anyway. They were just passing absolute nonsense between each other. So believe it or not, in one of these little love notes they were passing back and forth. Keep in mind, Jeremy is a frickin' 23-year-old man. Like, I think that needs to be reiterated so many times in this video that he is 23 years old and she is 12. It's just mind-blowing. But anyway, one of the notes said, and I quote, "You said you want to get engaged. Then here's a cue, ... Will you marry me? If so, then it's a verbal agreement." So yes, Jeremy proposed marriage, or I guess proposed engagement, to a 12-year-old girl. And I'm sure you can guess what Jasmine said. Obviously, she said yes. She wrote back, "Ha ha ha ha. I never thought I'd find myself laughing in a holding cell under these kind of circumstances. You make me so happy. Yes, yes, I will. I would love to." Obviously, a marriage between Jeremy and Jasmine wouldn't be legal. Like, it wouldn't be, you couldn't go through with this type of marriage anyway. This was just these two sucking each other's dicks, like trying to get off on the high of having just murdered her family, trying to continue this delusional epic hero narrative that they had come up with for each other, that it was them against the world and that no one could stop their love. This was just them riding this sick high that they were on. But the fact that they are handling this with such levity and laughter and giggling is actually disgusting. Like, you'd think that they would be quivering in fear knowing that they just got apprehended. At the very least, even if they're not remorseful, you think that they would be like kind of quietly trying to think through what they're going to say and how they're going to deal with this. But nope, those two are just in their own delusional world, making little jokes, proposing to each other. And I'm not trying to give them grace. I just genuinely think he wasn't smart enough and she wasn't old enough to actually fully comprehend the severity of their actions and to understand that they were in serious trouble right now. I think they were still somewhat in this bubble of, like I said, riding the high of the murder that they committed and probably imagining themselves in some sort of like dramatic movie. This was not the only inappropriate instance of them being completely inappropriate with their words, with their correspondence with each other. These two were completely unabashed, completely unfazed in terms of bragging about their plans and what they had in store. For example, a week before the murder, apparently Jeremy wrote a horrible poem and he posted it online for all of his friends and acquaintances to see. And this is part of the poem that I will read for you now. I apologize in advance. Payment. My lover's rents are totally unfair. They say they really care. They don't know what's going on. They just assume. Their throats I want to slit. They will regret the shit they have done, especially when I see to it they are gone. They shall pay for their insolence. Finally, there will be silence. Their blood shall be payment. Honestly, this man is so determined to be like different and edgy and brooding. It's actually embarrassing. Like, not only is he a groomer, a pedophile, and a murderer, but he's also a horrible, shitty poet. And that's just so embarrassing for him. I think part of this whole us against the world, writing poems, sending love notes in jail, I think it was all part of this sort of Bonnie and Clyde narrative that they had built for themselves. And that actually goes into sort of the next talking point I have here, was that apparently earlier on in the night of the murder, Jeremy was hanging out with some of his friends, and they were watching the popular 1994 movie Natural Born Killers, which stars Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis. This story, you've probably seen it, maybe you haven't. I actually haven't seen it. I don't know, I don't think I'll be able to see it the same after I've done this case, but it's about two people who had both traumatizing, horrible childhoods, and they grow up and they find each other, and they decide together as lovebirds to enact their revenge on everyone who's ever hurt them, and they go on like a killing spree. So they become a serial killing couple, similar to Bonnie and Clyde. I had to research the film a bit just to understand, but apparently the first two people that they kill on this killing spree is Juliette Lewis's character's mom and dad, because apparently she was horrifically abused as a child. So him and her kind of go take out their vengeance on her parents first. Obviously, to some weird degree, this movie struck a personal chord with Jeremy, and he felt inspired by it in some way. And I guess while they were watching the movie, Jeremy was kind of making comments to his friends like, oh, I would love to act out this movie in real life, like saying those type of things. It needs to be made abundantly clear that Jasmine's parents were wonderful, healthy, normal parents. She was by no means being abused. He's just telling himself whatever narrative he wants to justify what he's about to do, because I think at the end of the day, this man just wanted to kill someone, and this kind of gave him the perfect opportunity to not only kill someone and feel in his own head validated for it and justified for it, but also be able to live out this narrative of natural born killers in real life, because apparently this was his favorite movie and he was obsessed with this movie. And even during one of his police interviews, he said to one of the detectives, oh, have you ever seen the movie Natural Born Killers? It's the best movie ever made, or something like that. So he was not shy about his love for this movie. So speaking of those police interviews that I just mentioned briefly, let's get into those. Jeremy and Jasmine were both officially questioned and interrogated, obviously separately, but both of them admitted right off the bat that they had done this. They were the ones who killed the three victims, and apparently they told the story as if they were quite proud of it. So now I will tell you, according to Jeremy and Jasmine, what actually happened on the night of the murders on April 23rd, 2006. Apparently, Jeremy got himself good and drunk before he left the house, and also had taken what he described as a cocktail of different drugs. So just any drug he could find, threw it into his mouth, and a whole bunch of alcohol. He was properly pissed before he left, because apparently he was nervous about having to murder people. So he decided to numb those feelings by getting really drunk and high. And then he wore all black, packed up his little bag, his little murder kit, and headed over to Jasmine's house in the early hours of the morning. So it was very dark outside, very quiet. Jasmine had actually left the downstairs basement window open. They had planned all of this already, clearly over some sort of correspondence, I imagine, on one of those online forums, because he knew that Jasmine was going to leave that window open on that specific night. So Jasmine's upstairs in bed, but probably waiting for Jeremy. And as Jeremy enters into the basement, keep in mind he's extremely high and drunk, and apparently he makes a loud racket because he's like falling over, knocking things over, which wakes up Deborah and Mark upstairs. So Jasmine kind of rushes downstairs to meet him, and then they both start hearing sounds of footsteps coming down the stairs and like rustling upstairs and voices. So Jeremy panics because he knows that they're coming. So he apparently throws on a black face mask to cover his face and whips out a large knife, and then hides in the corner, crouching in the corner in the shadows like a freaking coward. The first person to come down the stairs was Deborah Richardson, and she's kind of looking around, and out of the shadows pops Jeremy Allen Stanky and begins brutally stabbing her to death. She did not even know what was happening. She didn't even have a minute to defend herself or try to run away. He just would stab and stab and stab until she wasn't moving and she wasn't breathing. As he was stabbing her viciously, she was, of course, screaming and screaming, probably for help, probably out of pain and terror. And, of course, Mark heard these screams upstairs, so he picks up speed. I think he was already kind of up anyway, but Deborah went down first for whatever reason. So Mark starts rushing downstairs to help his wife, and he grabs a screwdriver on the way for some sort of quick defense weapon. And as he's running down the stairs, he kind of reaches the bottom of the stairs and he sees his dead wife lying in a pool of blood. And he sees a large man with a black face mask holding a knife. So he turns around to run back up the stairs, I assume to call 911 or to grab his son. But he starts trying to run, but he wasn't fast enough. Jeremy had the advantage of knowing what was going to happen, whereas obviously Mark was completely stunned by all of this. So Mark was able to grab him and stab him multiple times in the back and then throw him back down the stairs and then continue stabbing him on the chest. Apparently in total, Mark was stabbed 9 times in the back and 13 times in the front. While all of this is happening with her father, apparently Jasmine runs up the stairs to go find her brother. I don't know exactly why. Some people think it was so she could keep him quiet, to make sure he didn't scream or wake up the neighbors or run out of the house. Some people think it was initially to comfort him and to check in on him. I don't really know why, to be honest, but she was upstairs in Jacob's bedroom when Jeremy eventually came up to join her. And he had the knife in his hand. And the two, both of them, one person says one person did it, one person says the other person did it, still to this day. But Jeremy claims that Jasmine was the one who slit Jacob's throat and stabbed him, and I think Jasmine says that it was Jeremy who did it. But either way, the two of them together in this plot of revenge against her family brutally murdered an 8-year-old innocent boy who had a lightsaber in his hand, a toy lightsaber, which he had in his hand in an effort to protect himself because he was scared. He heard all the screaming and everything downstairs, so the first thing he grabbed was a toy lightsaber. Oh my God. Investigators obviously asked Jasmine, why did you have to kill Jacob? He had nothing to do with keeping you and Jeremy apart. He was completely innocent. And Jasmine essentially said, I know he was innocent, but that's why I had to kill him. I couldn't let him live in this world without his parents or without his sister. He would be completely alone. And that fate is crueler than just killing him along with my parents. She thought in her deluded mind that she was actually doing him a favor, which is just so crazy and delusional. But it just goes to show you what people are actually capable of convincing themselves of, especially when they have a groomer and a manipulative, abusive person in their ear validating these thoughts and feelings. They can convince themselves of the craziest things and be steadfast in their beliefs, even if everyone around them can plainly see that they're not thinking clearly and they're making no sense. Up until this point in the case, wanted to give Jasmine a lot of grace and kind of still paint her out as some sort of victim in all of this, which in terms of grooming and stuff, she still is a victim. And I think multiple things can be true at once, if that makes sense. But people were stunned to find out that Jasmine was actually the ringleader of this plan and the originator of this plan. Friends of Jeremy would say that Jasmine would beg and beg him to please kill my parents, please. If you really love me, if you really care about me, you'll kill my parents, please. Again, I don't know how true that is, but she did write in a message that police were able to uncover, "Rawr, I hate them. So I have this idea. It starts with me killing them and ends with me living with you." In response, Jeremy wrote back, "Well, I love your plan, but we need to get a little more creative with the details and stuff." Another thing that's important to keep in mind is that at the time that all of this planning and complaining about her parents and self-isolating, at the time all of this was going on with Jasmine, she was dealing with an undiagnosed mental health disorder at the time, which I'm sure you could have assumed, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more now. Sorry guys, I had to stop filming for a minute because of some life things, so I'm back. It's been a little while later, so I apologize if it looks a little different or if I look a little different, but let's finish out this case because there's still a lot more to talk about. I was mentioning Jasmine's mental health, and if you were to look at a side-by-side photo, which I will put one up here, it's pretty obvious to anybody that some deep-rooted changes were going on with her externally and internally. One thing that came up after the fact when Jasmine was being arrested for this was that apparently a teacher at her school had confiscated a drawing that she was drawing in one of her school notebooks, and it was like a comic strip, and it was apparently a drawing of everyone in her family being burned alive in a fire. So this was given to the school counselor and kind of just kept in a file for safekeeping, but it was never reported officially. The CPS was never contacted. Not that her parents were doing anything, but I still think that should be some sort of protocol if you see a child is drawing this type of stuff, maybe just to check in and make sure everything's okay at home. A lot of times when children can't express things verbally, they actually will create doodles or create drawings to express their rage or their emotion or their confusion. And a lot of the times, these images are quite disturbing, and that's a sign that something is going on within the child that you should take a deeper look at. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit, but I do want to stay on the topic of Jasmine's mental health just for a minute while I'm already discussing it. So we're going to jump forward a little bit ahead to the trial and the sentencing, and the judge overseeing the trial mandated that Jasmine and Jeremy both had to undergo psychiatric evaluations before adequate sentencing was giving out. And this is very common in a lot of cases. Jeremy was actually found to have nothing wrong, no psychotic features, no schizophrenia, no bipolar, and they didn't have any diagnosis for him that would explain this. However, Jasmine actually was given a diagnosis that did explain a few things. She was diagnosed with conduct disorder, which is something that can actually only be diagnosed within children and teenagers. If it's not diagnosed or not remedied, it can spiral into larger, more severe mental disorders as you get into adulthood. Things like personality disorders, anxiety, depressions, psychopathy, etc. It's sort of seen as a precursor to some of these really severe mental health disorders that hit people in adulthood, like, let's say, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. Some of the symptoms for conduct disorder include maliciousness, crime, abuse, violence, impulsivity, theft, and so much more. Obviously, if you look at the case of Jasmine, you can see some of these symptoms or precursors in effect, like she was malicious, she was abusive, she was impulsive. I'm really glad I know about this disorder now because I never heard of it before, and it seems like something every parent should know about or be on the lookout for, because once doctors had this diagnosis and gave it to the judge, it really changed everything for Jasmine. Actually being diagnosed with this thing really changed everything for Jasmine, and I will get into that a little bit later. But first, I want to back up a tiny bit, back to the original investigation before they go to trial, because there's one more person that I need to introduce. About a week and a half after the murders took place, police actually made one more arrest in this case, and that was 19-year-old Casey Lancaster. She was actually charged with accessory to murder because Casey was the one who picked up Jeremy and Jasmine and was driving them around Medicine Hat in the hours after the murder. You might be wondering why this 19-year-old girl implicated herself in this crime and helped the two criminals get away. I mean, I don't think she knew exactly what was going on, to be fair, but she apparently had a very large crush on Jeremy. She really, really liked him, and I think was kind of just at the point where she was willing to do anything to make him happy. And Jeremy, obviously being the manipulative man he is, knew this and decided to exploit it for his own benefit. So he asked Casey if she could help them out, and he said, "Oh, me and Jasmine are going to need to be picked up at this time, and can you drive us to get food, and can you take us here?" And I'm assuming Casey was a little bit suspicious, but she just sort of went along with it. Casey was also a part of this mall group of goth friends who all hung out. And so they were all out to eat in a restaurant, as I said, after the murder. And this was when Jasmine was overheard saying that she gutted someone like a fish. So at this same restaurant, apparently Jeremy kind of pulled Jasmine aside and said, "Can you go outside and deal with the bag that's in the trunk of your car?" I guess after the murder, he had thrown a bag of evidence in the back. I think it was a truck, actually. So in the back of the pickup truck. and he said, "Can you dispose of that bag and clean up for me? I'd really appreciate it." And Casey, just wanting to make Jeremy happy and stay on his good side, she went and she did that. I wasn't able to find really what exactly was in this bag, but I did hear that there was a bloody sweater and a bloody knife. So, I mean, you take one look at that, especially when someone's asking you to dispose of it and to clean up, and you should be able to put two and two together. But Casey did what he said, and she disposed of the evidence. I don't know exactly what she did with it, but she got rid of that bag and she cleaned up the back of the pickup truck. And so this is why she was charged with accessory to murder. Investigators knew that Casey was, relatively good person, an innocent person. Obviously, she made a mistake here, and she probably wasn't the smartest, most secure person in the world. She kind of seemed a bit pathetic, just like doing all this stuff and incriminating herself just to make Jeremy happy. So they decided, instead of charging her with years and years in prison, they were actually going to give her a plea deal, sort of. So she needed to plead guilty to an obstruction of justice charge, and in return, she would get a year of house arrest instead of going into prison, and she would have to testify against Jeremy and Jasmine. So, of course, she took this because that's a very good deal, only a year of house arrest, considering she threw away evidence in a murder case. So now we're going to get into the final part of this video, which is the trial and the subsequent years after the trial and how Jeremy and Jasmine are both doing now. Under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, Jasmine's name actually couldn't be said publicly through the media or through the case because she was underage. So they would refer to her as JR throughout the entirety of this trial, but everybody knew who it was because, as you can remember, they sent out an Amber Alert and there was a lot of media news coverage about Jasmine Richardson when the police initially thought that she had been abducted, and they sent out all those alerts everywhere. Also, people within medicine knew the Richardson family and were able to put all the pieces together. So pretty much everybody knew that this JR person was Jasmine Richardson. Under the same Youth Criminal Justice Act, 12 is the youngest possible age at which a person can be charged with a crime in Canada. So children who were under 14 years of age at the time they committed a crime cannot be sentenced as adults and cannot be given more than a 10-year sentence. Jasmine pled not guilty, and her defense team used the excuses of, she was under the influence of Jeremy, who was a horrible, abusive, manipulative partner. Duh. I mean, that is true. That is true. But to me and to the jury, which you will see, that's just not a good enough reason to justify her facilitating the murder of 3 people. But that was the main narrative that they portrayed, was that Jasmine was sort of this innocent, naive young girl who had been completely manipulated by this older man. And yes, as I've said a million times, Jasmine was a victim of grooming. Jasmine was a victim of pedophilia, and I really do empathize with her on that. But 12 years old is old enough to know that murder is wrong. 12 years old is old enough to know the basic fundamentals of what's okay, what's not okay. To me, this has nothing to do with age. This is way more to do with the conduct disorder and just a severe disassociation from reality and just lack of empathy and lack of awareness of what's going on. And the one thing that definitely overcame the defense's notion that Jasmine was this naive, manipulated young girl was actually the messages that came forward that proved that Jasmine was the one who suggested that they murder her parents in the first place, and Jasmine was the one that apparently kept urging Jeremy through these messages, okay, let's do it, when are we going to do it? And the jury saw that, and it kind of bursted this bubble for them that Jasmine was this innocent, remorseful young girl. Because of that, Jasmine was found guilty. She was the youngest Canadian in history to be charged with multiple murder. And I think still to this day in 2024, she is still the youngest person in Canada, thank God, to be charged with multiple murder. So on July 9th, 2007, Jasmine was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and was later sentenced to the maximum penalty, which in Canada is 10 years in prison. Her sentence, however, included credit for 18 months already spent in custody, to be followed by 4 years in a psychiatric institution and 4.5 years under conditional supervision in the community. So after all was said and done, Jasmine Richardson would go on to spend 8 years in the justice system. Obviously, as I mentioned before, if Jasmine was sentenced as an adult and she didn't have the diagnosis of conduct disorder, I think her sentence would have been a lot longer and a lot more severe. On December 15th, 2008, Jeremy Allen Stanky would now go to trial. And he, of course, was being judged and sentenced as an adult. There wasn't much to say, but his defense tried because it is their job, and they kind of put forward the idea that Jasmine manipulated him and Jasmine was pressuring him, and they basically turned on each other as this is what always happens in these type of cases, is these star-crossed lovers. It's us against the world. The minute they go to trial, they turn on each other and blame each other. This happens every single time. I think with the age dynamics here, it's just not believable and not good enough for a 23-year-old. By this point, he was 25. They also suggested, which I really do not believe to be true, that Jeremy apparently went over there initially with the intention on having like a civil conversation with Deborah and Mark about wanting to continue to see their daughter and wanting to make this work. But, voices got raised and things got violent, and, he had no choice but to stab them to death because it was like self-defense and things got out of control. I imagine in this instance, the lawyers were trying to drop it down to second-degree murder, which would indicate that it wasn't premeditated, but it was in the heat of the moment. But that's just not going to work because this man had packed in a bag a ski mask, a knife. They had logs of conversations going on weeks talking about and planning the details of this murder. He's writing stuff on social media and writing poems suggesting he's going to slit their throats, he's going to silence them. So, like I said, the defense did what they did, but it didn't work, and Jeremy was sentenced to 3 life sentences. So in Canada, it is different from the States. Everyone is eligible for parole after 25 years with a life sentence. So it's like 25 years to life. So technically, he could go up for parole in 2033, but he does have 3 life sentences under his belt, and he also brutally murdered 3 people. I really don't see it likely that Jeremy gets out of prison anytime soon. I guess you never know. Jasmine, however, was really able to rehabilitate herself in the justice system. And I mean, to be fair, she did have a much lighter sentence and a lot more freedom to do so. So I'm going to get into Jasmine's reintegration, that's the word they use, reintegration into society. So Jasmine really was able to kind of bounce back and carry on with her life after these murders. And this is a very controversial thing that a lot of people are divided on. Some people find it as somewhat inspirational and a testament to the justice system. Some people find it to be completely unfair, and it just shows how our justice system in Canada is not strict enough. I mean, like anything, you really can't please everyone, but they really tried to rehabilitate Jasmine as best as they could, considering she was a young child and she did have this mental health disorder. So what they did was they allowed her to kind of carry on with life under supervision. So she was able to enroll in the University of Calgary in 2011, and she actually did graduate with a degree in 2015. And then she was able, through this reintegration into society, so she was able to go out into the community and do things and go to classes and meet up with friends, but it was all supervised. It was all being carefully watched by the government official. I was going to say by the state, but this is Canada. But you know what I'm saying? By the people who, I don't know the organization, but I'm sure there's a group of people like parole officers who are observing her, checking in with her, making sure that she's staying mentally stable. But because she had this little bit of freedom and was able to tiptoe back into society like other people her age and go to university and make friends, and she was able to become a more mature, well-rounded person. And she was able to get educated at a university level and expand her mind to things. And it didn't take long after her sentencing for Jasmine to start feeling a lot of remorse for what happened and to start admitting that she felt horrible and she regretted it. I don't know whether this was because her psychiatric help was working and she was starting to come back to reality, or whether she was just trying to get people on her side. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there through every step of the psychiatric process, but she did later on, when she was separated from Jeremy and when she was getting the help she needed psychologically, she was able to feel deep remorse for this and very much regretted what happened. Like, will that bring back Mark, Deborah, and Jacob? No, but it is somewhat nice to hear that this girl, at least at the very least, feels bad about it and feels guilty. Her supervisory period officially ended on May 6, 2016, and from that point on, she was free. And apparently the judge said at this meeting where he officially declared her supervisory period over that he, had followed her journey and he believed that her parents would be very proud of her. Obviously, this created quite a stir and was quite a controversial thing to say, and a lot of people found this a very offensive thing to say, which I can see where those people are coming from. But actually, apparently, Jasmine's external family members, so like her aunts, uncles, cousins, etc., because everyone in her direct nuclear family were murdered, but her other family members actually validated this statement and said that they agreed and they were proud of how far Jasmine has come, and they do believe Mark and Deborah were very proud of the young woman that Jasmine has become despite everything that happened. I was kind of shocked to hear that a lot of her extended family actually backed her through all of this, stood by her, supported her, encouraged her to continue to get better. They weren't in denial. They knew that Jasmine did these things. They knew the whole story. They knew every gruesome detail. But they somehow had the strength and the forgiveness within to stand by her and see her potential to grow and to become better from this. And they decided they wanted to encourage her along that journey, which I applaud them for that. I don't know if I could do that, but that takes a lot of strength. And I do see, though, why they didn't want to leave this young girl with a severe psychiatric issue completely abandoned for the rest of her life with no one in her corner. Anyway, there's no right or wrong way to feel about this. There's no right or wrong answers. This is just the way things played out in this particular situation. And I'm trying my best at the end here to see the good in it, because that's the only way that I can move forward with the rest of my day. Let's say we do sentence a 14-year-old to life in prison and they have no chance of parole or no chance of getting out or being rehabilitated or getting education or getting proper socialization. The alternative is that they just rot away in prison and become worse people, probably. And then let's say they do get out on parole after 25 years when they're all of a sudden they're in their 30s or 40s after 25 years, and they're just dropped back into society after having no sense of a normal adulthood or transition into adulthood. The likelihood of them reoffending and ending up back in prison, or their mental health conditionings just being way worse than they even were before, that is just so likely. That's the cycle and the pattern we see over and over again, is when we just throw people in prison and don't think twice about them. And then, I don't know. I don't claim to know everything. I'm just talking through all of this in my head right now. But I am curious to hear what you guys have to think on this case. Jasmine is out living her life. I believe she has a new name now, and she lives in an undisclosed location in Canada. I really couldn't find too much else on her. As far as I'm aware, she has never committed another crime, never been violent, and she stayed out of the justice system since her release in 2016. So that's that, guys. Let me know what you think. Leave all your comments below, and if you have another case that you want me to cover or look into, make sure you comment that below as well, and subscribe to this channel and hit the notification so you don't miss another upload in the future. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for spending the last hour or so with me, and hopefully we can learn and grow from all of this and become better people. That is truly my goal at the end of the day. Have a good one. Stay safe, stay well, and be kind.